Folks, we've talked to you about the Ash Springs and Fort Crawford and how the railroad come in and Hallsville got founded. Instead of going through everything that happened, I'm going to hit some high points that have happened starting in the 1870s up until about the 1970s or 80s. I'm not going to get right up to the present time. There are some things that happened possibly the first time you may not know about, and I have some dates on it. I'd like to go over those. Like in 1871, the lodge was completed late that year, the Masonic Lodge, and they started, James F. Taylor Mason started meeting there, and school was held on the bottom floor. And like I said, this was used at the lodge, this one or another one, till 1914 for the school. And the Masons used it till 1970, till they built a new one, and they have one sitting at the exact spot now. In 1975, we had the cemetery open. You may wonder, that's when they moved some graves from Fort Crawford and all over here, but in 1975, when our cemetery was established, some people that come in may wonder about that because they had a historical marker there and it'd get hit and it's still down. It's going to be a while before we get that replaced. Okay, in 1878, a terrible thing happened. The lodge burned. The fire got loose, came up from, I think it was from a hotel, and it came up and it burned the lodge and all down. But the Masons got together. They got the school kids, they had them go to the Church of Christ. It's over across the street on Church Street where Greer's nice new barn is, or nice new building is. A fellow named Dozier Prothro, along with Tom Coleman and Cy Creighton, built the lodge, and they had it completed by the fall of 1879. It was dedicated. 1880, the Methodist Church came in from Fort Crawford, and they set up down on what is now East Highway 80 first. They were there before they went down to North Central. 1889, this was the first extension to school that we have in our history. I introduced Brother Jeff Collum, our superintendent of the night at Lionsville. I said it's 1899. But I've checked further notes, and it was 1889. They built a building about 20 by 40, and they put it on the back of the lodge so extra kids could stay in and go to school in that building, and it was used a long time. 1898, this is probably not too important, but Holloway's store started selling casket. That was the first caskets I heard sold. Gary Lovelace's grandfather sold them. 1906, we had a terrible fire. It started downtown and it burned a whole lot of the stores on the north side of the town, and it went west. It didn't get the lodge though, but it got a number of stores that burned. They had to be rebuilt in 1906. 1909, Mr. Haywood opened the bank. That was the first bank to Hallsville. He came from Marshall. He'd worked in Shreveport, and C.F. Haywood, and he opened that bank, and about 3 years later, he built the bank. He had the bank building built, and that building is still open. Goforth has his offices in it now. He also, another thing I might point out, when he opened that bank, he realized that people were buying gasoline, and they needed all of that. They were getting a few cars in. He actually stocked some pumps for gasoline, and he actually sold some oil and some tubes, some tires, so forth. So he tried to take care of the people there. He spent president of that bank for 41 years to 1950, and then he took over as an insurance company. He put it in there. It's still kind of a remnant of it's left with Kane Insurance. It's still kind of part of the old insurance, but it used to be Haywood Insurance. 1909, also Brown and Cullen. This was a big store. This was a big mercantile store. It was Mr. Brown, my grandfather, and Mr. Cullen. Mr. Cullen, my grandfather died in 1921, but Mr. Cullen ran this store till 1962. He had a store there too, and then he ran a store across feed store till he was 92 or 3 years old. He kept a business. 1910, the White Building was built. Why did I mention that? I mentioned that because that building is still standing. This is a building where the Farm Bureau is located in. It was built in 1910. 1986, they moved it across the street down there and made a Farm Bureau building out of it. 1914, that's when our public school was built. Mr. D.T. Bowles. Mr. Bowles was the superintendent that worked. He worked with Mr. Haywood. He secured a loan for $15,000. They built the first high school in Hallsville, Texas. It was built over on Green Street. It was a two-story school. I think had a big auditorium upstairs. Didn't have enough classroom. We were still hurt, but we had an auditorium to meet. And we used it, I think up till 1937 we used it. We built the new one then. 1919, the Farmers Bank. This was a bank building. It became the First State Bank in 1950, but it was another bank from the First State. It built where the donut shop is now. It was right there. It was built in 1919. It went belly up in the 1930s. It didn't make it. 1920 was the year of the first school buses. That's when some of the schools that lived out in the country, the students started coming into Hallsville School. B.F. Walden Ben Walden had the first school bus. He owned the bus, and they really didn't want to come in, but Mr. Harry Jones was on the board, and he went to meet with him. And for some odd reason, his wife went with him, and with having a woman there at the meeting, everything worked out. They were able to work out an agreement that the Walden students would come into Hallsville School. This was the first consolidation we ever really had for bringing them in school buses. We may have had some other schools fold or something, but this was the first of the school buses, 1920. 1926, this was when they named Highway 80. It was a highway that came through here several years in the teens, but this is when they started putting road sign names on it. And it was Highway 80 in the 20s, 26. 1927, I mentioned that this was the first coach was hired. Mr. J.C. Armstrong been hired in 26, and he was the superintendent. He hired Ben Pennell. He was at SFA. He was a real good baseball player and basketball, and he was good to coach in both of those. He also brought football. I'll speak about it in a minute. I'm going to skip it a little bit. We had some good teams early on there, but 1934, we had our first gym. It was built over on Green Street in the general area where the 1948 gym was built. This gym burned Thanksgiving night, 1942. I was a 4-year-old boy. I remember my parents carried me over. I watched that burn. I was so scared it was going to catch our house on fire. Sparks were flying from the south, and they were going up over the railroad track and the highway, going right toward our house. But it didn't. But it burned the gym down. And this was a terrible time for a gym to burn. It was right just the beginning of World War II, and we went 4 years before we even thought about a gym, and it was a while before we had one built. Things were kind of slow during World War II. We didn't have a whole lot going on. Let me back up. I've kind of got ahead of myself here. This gym This gym, like I said, was built in 34. 35, Hallsville Incorporated. They became a city for the first time. Dick Bolden was hired, or was voted the mayor. Yeah, they did it because they wanted to try to get some city water. But things didn't work out. They made a few little ordinances. They may have raised a very, very small tax. And there were some people, they didn't like it being a city, and they voted to disincorporate it in about 3 or 4 months after that. So we were back to being a sleepy little town then, no more city. This was in 35. However, in 1937, we built a new high school. This is the white brick that sits on Green Street. It was started in 1936, completed in 1937. It's where I went to school. I graduated in 1956 there. And it was used as a high school until 1958, some 20-something years, 21 years it was used as a high school. And it was used many years after that. It was noted so much, it had an auditorium. It still, I think they used it for storage now. It had an auditorium and seated about 300 people. It had many, many programs there in it. Also in 1937, Ben Burnell, I told you, the coach that was hired in 1927, he started football here. But a lot of schools around had football. Hallsville didn't. He went to Longview and Marshall, and he borrowed uniforms. He borrowed plays. He never had played football. He didn't know anything about it. But he had worked the boys out quite a good bit in 1936 and the spring of 1937. So in that fall, he started a team. He had some good athletes, and they finished 4-4. In the Maidenhead season, they won 4 games. They lost 4. And so 1938, we got a call that if Hallsville was a city, a grant, Wright Patman, the congressman, said there was a grant that had been approved, and if Hallsville would become a city, they would put up the money for a city water system. So the town got in a hurry, and they voted to incorporate. Ellie Kendrick, he was kind of a timber dealer, and had a big cross-tie yard right on Highway 80, and he also ran a store. He was become the first mayor. Tom Brown, who would later become mayor in 1947, worked quite a bit on this water, the paperwork and all the information that was needed to put in a water system. He worked on this. His brother Charles had worked on the first one, may have helped him some. But they got it started, and it was completed in 1939. Hallsville, you could go in and turn on a faucet. You didn't have to use a well to get water anymore. You could turn on a faucet, and we had water. And this was a great thing. Also in 1939, this was the year we had a good football team. We won our first district championship, and we also won the by-district, and they opened up Holloway Field. They had planned to open it the year before, but it had been a dry year, but it rained a good bit. Somewhat they had enough grass to open the field. This was on Waller Street, and this field, stadium was used from 1939 through 1970. It was our football field before Bobcat Stadium was opened up. Okay, 1941, the first fire department was organized. John Johnson was the fire chief. He was a local barber, and he would become the city secretary and the water superintendent during World War II. But he was the first fire chief. He served a long time. And they got the first fire truck in 1946. Kind of an army surplus one, I think, and they kind of did some work on it, and we got tremendous fire truck. Once we become They got tax money. They have some of the best equipment in Texas. The Hallsville Fire Department does now. Also, 1946, we were able to get lights for the football field. We've been playing the games at 2:30 in the afternoon, so we got some lights. And the Lions Club kind of had to help push this. They were formed in April the 3rd, 1946. The Lions Club started. They've worked behind many projects through the years, and they still are. 1948, we did get that gym rebuilt. We had a gym. They got a bond issue, and it was built kind of where the old one been, right on Green Street. It was kind of a small type gym, but it was a good gym, and it stayed there for many years. My sister had PE 19 years in there. She taught 3rd and 4th grade PE there. It was used as Texas Eastman. They used it for played intramural ball, outside of the school. Used it quite a year. And finally, they tore it down a few years ago. Let's see, 1948, 49, 50, we built our first community center. The Lions Club took an old building, they had it moved down. My daddy and uncle worked on it, and they built a community center, and they used it till through the 60s. It was down right where the city park is now. It sat there a long time. 1950, we completed our first city hall. It was a little small building on Highway 80, and it had a little office in it. Mr. John Johnson had an office there, and we had a room for a fire truck or two in the back. So we had a fire station and a city hall together as of 1950. We built another building, was completed where the present fire department is now in 1969. Haywood, also in 1950, he sold the bank. He sold it to a man named Bill Amos, and it removed across the street. And the First State Bank, it was in the old former State Bank building, and it remained over there for quite a number of years. Mr. Amos, he eventually sold it to Mr. Ollie Barham, and Mr. Barham got the money together, and he built a new bank where City Hall is now located. It had stayed there from 1963 to 1985, and John Ruff and them owned it, and they built the bank where Guarantee Bank's now located. This is where Guarantee, because we got several banks we have to mention now. 1951, we put in a sewer system. This was a good deal. No more outhouses, no more personal sewer system getting stopped up and all. We had the city sewer, and this was a great deal. Also, I might note that this was the year they built 4 lanes to Longview. Highway 80, up until 1951, had been a 1-lane death trap driving to Longview. They made 4 lanes. People started shopping more in Longview than Marshall then, when they had 4 lanes to go. Also, I don't have the exact years, but maybe 48, 49, how 450 was completed, and then in the early 50s, the other part it was. 1950, we had dial telephone. We didn't have to ring it. We had our first dial telephone. 1960, we started a lot of subdivisions. They started building houses. Hallsville started going a little bit. 1958, we built a new high school. This is the school that's on Willard Street across from the cemetery, the high school, the first one there. And it was used from 1958 to 1975. And that's when we built the high school out on 450. 1963, we had our greatest football team. We won 12 games. We went to the state semifinals before we got live. We had our first all-state players, and James Greer and Lindsey Roberts and Stanley Lawrence. 1964, the sub courthouse was built. We kind of quit using the community center along about here. We started having a lot of activities. There was room in the sub courthouse. There wasn't there as many offices in there, and there was room. They had a lot of civic activities were held there. 1968, we had integration. That's the first actual. Well, they actually kind of started a couple of years before that. Very few students from Galilee came over, but the whole school came over in 1968, and we started. By the way, that they had their Galilee team had played in the state finals in 1967. That's when they had the great Robert Newhouse, who went on to play with the Super Bowl, playing the Super Bowl for the Dallas Cowboys. He played his last high school ball for Galilee in 1967, graduated in 68. Galilee, of course, moved over, became a part of Hallsville. In 1970, the city parks were built. Early 70s, we started. Once they moved the community house, they started a city park in the 70s there. Of course, we had the new high school built in 1975 out on 450, and it was used till 212. It was used a long time, 37 years before we built a new one. We went to 4A in 1974. A lot of people were wondering about that. 4A and then 5A. And I mentioned the new high school. Probably, I'm going to cut off here, but I'd say, in my opinion, two of the greatest things that happened in the last 15 years, the Brookses were put in. This has been a tremendous help to Hallsville. It was put in the early 2000s. And in 2012, we had a beautiful new high school built, and we're getting a lot of use out of it. And we've had a lot of different programs, become one of the top schools in the country. And the city's going good now. We're running. We have a city manager as of this year, and everything seems to be picking up around Hallsville. And I'm sure a lot of you know a lot that's happening again. We've enjoyed talking to you. We'd like to hear your comments on these programs we've had. Good day.